Hello, friends. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the 10th episode of Caste Conversation. I'm Pradip Pariyar. Caste Conversation is a dialogue to understand the caste dynamics that affect our society, our life, and our value system. Caste Conversation is an initiative of Dalit Lives Matter Nepal to ignite solution-oriented dialogue for the elimination of caste-based discrimination and untouchability. Dalit Lives Matter Nepal is a social movement to create a just society where every Nepali can enjoy life without the fear of being persecuted in the name of caste. It is an initiative to counter and fight back all forms of caste-based discrimination and untouchability, a collective intervention to ensure every right of every single Nepali citizen as guaranteed in the Constitution of Nepal. Dalit Lives Matter Nepal is a connection with the people to build a collective force and amplify people's power to eradicate any inequality, discrimination, and violence based on the caste system. This is the 10th episode of Caste Conversation. Today, we are joined by Meena Varma, an ardent human rights advocate who works tirelessly to end caste-based discrimination. Meena is one of the key leaders who have contributed to globalize the caste-based discrimination as one of the serious human rights issues. Meena served as the Executive Director of International Dalit Solidarity Network, IDSN, and Director Dalit Solidarity Network UK. IDSN work as a global level for the elimination of caste-based discrimination and similar form of discrimination based on work and descent. Meena is also the coordinator of the UK All-Party Parliamentary Group for Dalit, which was formed in October 2010. This is a cross-party group and has members from both the House of Commons and Lords. Meena also chaired the Council of Minorities Group in International. There is a long bio of Meena. You can Google and you can search. She's done wonderful work in this sector. Meena ji, welcome to the Caste Conversation.
Thank you, Pradeep. I'm delighted to be here. It's an absolute honor having seen the previous 9 conversations that you've had with different people. I'm truly honored to be number 10.
Thank you. Thank you for joining with us today. So before we begin, I remember interviewing one of the IDSN founder 15 years back. So I was moved by IDSN vision to globalize the caste questions. And after 15 years, I'm joined by you, and it's wonderful. IDSN has completed 2 decades of work and going strong. Would you share the 20 years of IDSN journey? What has it achieved so far, and what are the challenges it to overcome? Floor is yours, Meena.
Well, thank you very much. I can't admit to being around for the last 20 years of IDSN. But I have been around long enough, I think since 2007, when I joined the DSN-UK, the Dalit Solidarity Network in the UK. Both these 2 organizations were formed around the same time, so over 20 years ago now. And I think the mandate, and I said this to you, Pradeep, before, the mandate for IDSN comes from its members. It doesn't come from me, it doesn't come from the Secretariat, it comes from its members. And the formation of IDSN was very much part of organizations in Nepal, organizations in India, and it grew from that membership. And the importance was to actually bring to the international arena the issue of caste-based discrimination. And we have seen most recently, and I'm sure we'll go into this into a little bit more detail, with the Black Lives Matter movement, what a difference that has made across the globe. Why hasn't the Dalit Lives Matter movement made the same impact? Why hasn't it had the same visualization? And that's why I'm so pleased to be here today, because that is part of what IDSN wants to do, is to have that impact. And I think over the past 2 decades, IDSN has very much focused on that international arena, especially with the United Nations in Geneva and the EU in Brussels. And the reason why we focus on these 2 institutions is to make a difference at the sort of high-level international institution level. And that is within the United Nations is the Human Rights Council. And within that, we raise the issue of caste-based discrimination at every possible moment. I mean, literally, wherever we can get the words caste or Dalit or discrimination in, we ensure that we do. And that is with what we call the universal reviews, universal periodic reviews of countries. And in fact, we have just submitted, along with my good friends in Nepal, the UPR shadow report for Nepal. And I think also, you know, with that also, we hope that there will be recommendations that will come from each of the states. And that we do with India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, as well as Nepal. And I think also what we then use is what they call the mandate holders, special rapporteurs, water and sanitation, poverty and human rights, violence against women. I mean, there's a whole array, minority issues, and we use those relationships to ensure that those special rapporteurs raise the issue of caste discrimination in all their thematic and country reports. And we recently had that with the special rapporteur on racism, where she was actually raising the issue of caste-based discrimination and technology and digital rights. And we will move on to the same sorts of issues in the latter part of this year, where we will raise the issue among caste hate speech. And you know that we are doing some research into that at the moment. And so we want that globalization of this issue. But the hardest thing is to really get people to understand that such a heinous practice as caste-based discrimination still exists in this 21st century. How can it exist? You know, we talk about modern day slavery. Well, caste discrimination is ancient day slavery that continues into the modern day. And why hasn't it been addressed? Why is it constantly swept under the carpet? We have to do more if we are going to finally eliminate what is one of the worst human rights abuses. And I get, you know, and that is what we need to do. That is why we need to keep fighting and keep raising this at all levels. And we do that at Parliament level as well as the international UN level. So that's one of the bases of what we do. I mean, 20 years is, you know, there's been a lot of great successes, but there has been equally the same number of challenges. And for every step we take forward, sometimes I feel we take 2 steps back. And sometimes you still want to shut yourself into a cupboard and bang your head against a brick wall because people still aren't accepting that this exists and it has to be dealt with. I take a pause.
Yeah, you correctly mentioned there's a lot of challenges. We can understand that. And then at the same time, you mentioned about the UN human rights things, but I just want to add on this. Could you please share us how International Dalit Solidarity Networks for the promotion and protection of Dalit human rights through the UN human rights frameworks, how you are doing it? Can you a little bit aid on that?
Sure, and I think for each thing we do, I mean, we work slightly differently because obviously, you know, if we're dealing with particularly the mandate around water and sanitation, or that so we have to then focus in on what are the issues that affect Dalits disproportionately more. And for every single, if you look at the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, for that declaration, every single one, starting with the right to dignity, is what Dalits disproportionately are abused by. You know, this is the thing. So what we try and do is to take the UN human rights mechanisms and turn them to our advantage. And what we need to do with that is to nuance what we do. So, and above all, Pradip, it's important that everyone who is listening understands that, as I say again, our mandate comes from you, the members. So without the information we get from you, we can't move forward. And that's really important. We cannot do anything unless you provide us the information. And very recently, so for a very concrete example, you sent some information along with lots of my other Nepalese colleagues on the 2 cases that have hit maybe the headlines, I'm not sure, but you know, the case of the 5 young men that were massacred, and then also the so-called suicide of the young Dalit girl. These cases have now been taken by IDSN and have been put into a formal letter to the United Nations Special Rapporteurs on minority issues, violence against women. And what we're asking them to do is to demand that these are investigated further. And so what that does is it spreads it across the UN mandates, because we will be sending that letter for information to other UN Special Rapporteurs. We will also then make statements at the Human Rights Council. And again, we do that in conjunction with you as members. And so, you know, if we're doing a special statement, maybe this time on water and sanitation, we want to highlight the ongoing disgusting practice of manual scavenging. Now, we need to have the information from the ground. So we will speak to colleagues at Jan Sahas, we will speak to colleagues at the Safai Karamchari Andolan, and make sure what we have is the reality on the ground, so that when we're presenting that information, we have the statistics and we have the real words, as I said, of our members. So that's the one thing with the UN. And I think the more and more we get that international recognition, and we have got the recognition, but what we don't have is the action that comes with the recognition and the recommendation, because rights are no rights if they're not implemented. And that's the key for us, is the implementation of the rights. And I was at a webinar just a couple of days ago, and they talked about a rights for all project, or the reality. And rights cannot be realized if the rights holders themselves don't know what their rights are. Does that make sense? So there's a raising awareness from both sides. There's the raising awareness in country of what rights should look like, and there's the raising awareness at the international level of what rights are being abused.
Yeah. You rightly mentioned about the recent case, and thank you for that leadership as well. So I have another question around United Nations. The United Nations terminology for caste-based discrimination is discrimination based on work and descent. Have Dalits moved to a broader framing within this international terminology? What do you think about this?
It's difficult to say, because the UN formal wording is, as you said, discrimination based on work and descent. Now, that wording was recognized and understood by the UN because the word caste was too difficult to get in. And we find that same backlash, as it were, from the UK. We find that actually when you mention the word caste, it creates a barrier that goes up, and people don't necessarily want to break down that barrier. Whereas I sometimes feel that you need to say exactly what it is on the tin. And discrimination based on work and descent does encompass many more than just the South Asian countries. So, you know, and I know my colleagues at the Asian Dalit Rights Forum, plus the Inclusivity Project, they're very much focusing on the much more broader discrimination based on work and descent. But I find the wording too long. I find the wording doesn't say what it is exactly, because people are trying to understand that. If there was something else we could decide on that could encompass all of those things, I think that would be great. But generally, I find that, you know, if we use discrimination based on work and descent, it's a much nicer term. Whereas caste-based discrimination is the one that kind of slaps the governments around the face and say, you have caste-based discrimination. And then, to be honest, you know, we do get a lot of backlash because we say caste-based discrimination is a human rights issue. Whereas what we have found, especially here in the UK, is that the Hindu lobby is the one that always proclaims against caste discrimination, because they say if we use caste, then it is anti-Hindu. Whereas actually caste is, casteism is found among Sikhs and Christians and Muslims and Hindus and those of no faith at all. So it isn't a religious issue. It is actually a human rights issue, as I said. But the terminology is something that I think using the terminology based on work and descent in some ways can soften it, but in other ways can broaden it to other countries in Africa, in South America, where forms of caste-based discrimination also exist.
Yeah, that's very true. You earlier also mentioned about the Black Lives Matters. So let me ask you that question right now. How Dalit movement should collaborate with similar other movements like Black Lives Matters, and why solidarity with other similar movement is important for Dalit movements?
I think at this point we're at such a pivotal moment in the world that we should be. There are. I mean, there is an argument that if you team up with other discriminated movements, that you maybe weaken your issue. But in the end, that's all what solidarity is about. It's not about weakening the issue. It's about strengthening the issue. It is about strength in numbers, as we have seen with Black Lives Matter across the globe. Whether things really change is a different question. But what happens is that you raise awareness of issues, not just to the people who know, but even to the people who don't know, where suddenly people will say, oh my goodness, I had no idea that this was happening. Really, this can't be happening. And that's what we need to do, is we need to open people's consciousness. We need to open people's minds, because I think if people understood in the same way, whether it be in the UK or the US, in the same way about that opening of consciousness against Black Lives Matter and the old slave trade, that has meant that people are sitting up now and taking notice. And that's what we need to do. We need to have strength in numbers, and global solidarity is really important. But at the same time, the Black Lives Matter movement that is coming out of the US and now into the UK is still a Western lens. So we have to think about how we can marry that Western lens with our lens in South Asia and other countries, where I mean, the trouble with casteist behavior is that people just feel that there is a right to behave this way. They just feel that it's an us and them situation. So if you're a Dalit, then your life doesn't mean anything. And so therefore we can treat you badly. And we need to switch that. That's the bit we need to change, is that the mindset. But the mindset takes a very, very, very long time to change. So therefore, one of the most important things is the rule of law. And so legislation in Nepal, in India, in Bangladesh, it has to be implemented. It has to have, the rule of law has to be strong, so that you start to change people's behavior, even if you can't change their casteist minds.
Yeah. We have a lot of friends here, and then we have a Facebook Live also. Friends, if you have any question to Meena ji, kindly place here in the chat box. Also, we request you to keep your questions very brief. That will be easy to ask more questions. You just mentioned about the South Asian, and if I'm correct, in one of your speeches, you have said that caste is not a Hindu problem, and that is a South Asian problem. So, and given the fact that it travels as a global human rights issues today, why it is rather a South Asian problem, despite all this finding solidarity is still difficult in the struggle against caste-based discrimination? How can we change that? Maybe you can relate these two questions together.
Well, I wouldn't say it was I have never said it's a South Asian problem. What I'm saying is that it's not a Hindu problem. Because and the thing about caste is that wherever we go, we take caste with us. And that's why I'm saying right now is a pivotal moment. That's why the work in the UK is so important. The work in the US is so important, because where there are large diasporas and of the South Asian community, whether they be British or whether they be American, we have seen this explosion now of caste discrimination. The UK has had that for a very, very long time. So because the diaspora population has been embedded within the UK for a long time. So therefore, gradually that discriminatory behavior, I feel in some ways has got worse. Because I think when many people went to the UK in the, whenever it was, and some way back in the previous 2 centuries, they had a much more common enemy of racism. So the racism was the enemy. It was the Asians and against white people, or Asians and blacks against white people. Whereas now we see that there is a lot more, the larger the Asian community, the more embedded caste discrimination is. And we see that in the UK, which is why in the UK we have been campaigning for the last 10 years to have legislation brought in to outlaw caste discrimination. And now if we look at the US, there is a very pivotal case in the US that I think everybody is now talking about, where there is a US tech company, a US tech corporation that is being taken to court by the California Department of Equality and Housing, because two of their employees, Indian, and I don't know if they're Indian American or whether they have come over on an Indian work visa, I'm not sure, have deliberately discriminated against one of their Dalit employees. So, you know, although I'm saying it's not a Hindu problem, most of the discrimination on caste-based discrimination has originated in South Asia. And so therefore that's where that behavior has been exported to other countries.
Let me take you in the UK context. The UK government's Equality and Human Rights Commission in its 2014 research report said that the caste discrimination exists in the UK, and you already mentioned that. According to the survey among South Asian American by Equality Lab, casteism exists in the United States too. It is evident that the caste-based discrimination is a global phenomenon right now, a global issue. But why is caste still so off the agenda? So off the agenda, still not in the mainstream agenda?
I think the difference actually between the UK and the US, as I said, the diaspora population has lived there a very long time. And it is this, even the government has admitted that there is caste-based discrimination, but what they don't want to legislate against it. They hope that, you know, there may be other methods of trying to address it. And I think the need to legislate, as I said to you, is so important because of the behavior issue. But I think there is a very powerful lobby that is advocating against the legislation. And that lobby is quite, you know, it's like I said, is powerful, it is privileged, it has wealth. You know, all the things that we know happen in Nepal or India, the same thing would be happening in the UK. And I think in the US, so the case I specifically cited, this case of Cisco Inc., their response to this has been that they thoroughly investigated the complaint, but because there is no policy or legislation against caste-based discrimination, there was nothing they could do about it. Which is why I'm saying legislation in these countries is so important. And which is why amongst corporations and businesses that operate across the globe, including in Nepal or in India, all of these corporations and businesses should have anti-caste discrimination policies. I think that's really important. We need to bring this out so that, you know, when we're talking about India and the migrant workers that were stranded, or even in Nepal, these are the invisible workers. Why are they invisible? Why are they just being allowed to die? And I think that is the thing that I'm constantly working on. There is just a real need to start that global awareness.
Yeah, we have a question from Berlin, Germany. Please forgive me if I spell wrong name. Florin asks, what can and should academics in the West to do support the Dalit struggle? Which are the resources that can be shared for maximum impact?
What can academics do?
Yeah, what can and should academics in the West do to support the Dalit struggle? Which are the resources that can be shared for maximize the impact?
There are, so I'm in the UK, and I work with a lot of academics here in the UK. Some who are specifically working on the caste legislation here in the UK, and others that work on it internationally. So there are lots of research reports. I mean, it's a difficult question because academics and this isn't an insult to the question or to academics, often work it within their own little circle. And so those within that circle know what other academics are writing and what research is being shared, and those reports. And there is a whole, if you look at both the IDSN website and the DSN-UK website, we will have a list of all of those sort of research reports, etc., that people can look at. How they are then used is again, I will go back to what I was talking about with the UN. There are certain nuances. So there are academics that have been working on caste in supply chains. There are academics that have been working on much more sort of grassroots level. So we need to be able to get that information and use it where possible. So I will always ask my expert academics to present maybe at a parliamentary meeting or any other high-level meeting. So what academics could do is, yes, continue the research, but it's how they then decide to report on that research or highlight that research. We have support from people in Germany. So I think we do actually have a Dalit Solidarity Network in Germany. So, it's making sure you connect with those networks in order to be able to spread that much more widely than it currently is.
Yeah, there's a lot of role from academia and think tank, especially. So we have a question from Punit. Since there is such a lack of conversation in caste in global arena, what are the challenges of articulating problem of caste in global arena? Maybe you can answer this. Or how does one explain the horrible thing that caste is to people in foreign country? How to convey this?
Well, this is why I think the global solidarity matters so much. So, within IDSN, we have international associates, we have Dalit Solidarity Networks, and that's why, it is about constantly raising that. So I would say there is a real understanding of caste discrimination in the UK through the work that we've been doing in the UK. We can see that is a growing issue in the US. I mean, these two countries are particularly important because of the large populations we have. And I work with the Nepali population in the UK as much as the Nepali population in the US. So, and that's also really important. I think it's really important to not focus in on India, because sometimes that's what happens all the time, is people just focus in on India and just think it's an Indian issue and problem. That's why I think it's really important to get the Nepali voices out there, as well as the Indian voices and Bangladeshi and Pakistani and Sri Lankan voices, where we work within the South Asian context. And that, I think, is also why we work with organizations like Imada based in Japan, so that we can raise the issue of the Buraku people who are also discriminated on that basis. And I think it is important. And I know my colleagues in the Asian Dalit Rights Forum and the Inclusivity Project are also working on the issue within as I said, the African context and the South American context. I mean, personally, I think at the moment for IDSN, it's really important that we still focus in on international Dalit solidarity. For us, that is our being. That's why we are here, and I think that's really important. But I think I forgot the second half of your question, Pradip, on that. Did I answer that?
No,
or
you mentioned very correctly. It's okay. It's alliance building and all. So maybe I'll ask. There's a lot of questions from our friends, so I'll ask more questions to you, so that it's more interactive as you want. This session should be the interactive session. So Dr. Purna Nepali asks, what would be a strategy for global solidarity for race and caste? So North-South and South-South strategy. Yeah, go ahead.
So a global strategy on race and caste. So this is a really tricky one, because the main focus of caste or work and descent-based discrimination under the UN mandate is actually included in the Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination as a subset of race. But it's not, is it? Caste is not race. we're all of the same race that are committing caste-based discrimination. So there's a real nuance around that I think that that we need to still keep unpicking, but at the same time we need to be able to build on that racial discrimination convention in order to ensure that caste-based discrimination is eliminated. I mean, there's lots of conversations, I think, about the race and caste issue. I mean, we do have a section on the IDSN website regarding that. We also have had the same conversation within the UK about where we can have caste-based discrimination sit within equality legislation. And at the moment, we have it sitting under race, because that's what was agreed by Parliament when they approved the amendment to include caste-based discrimination. But the caste word is the one that's, as I said, upsetting the anti-legislation lobby. They would like that removed altogether, and they feel that actually caste is covered under the ethnic origin limb of legislation. And again, I think, with Global Solidarity, it is about working with those other groups that focus on racial discrimination. I mean, I'm not saying just because caste and race don't go together, we shouldn't be working with those groups. And we do that very much, especially with, I mean, as I said again, within the UK context. So, it's important that we work with those. And the Equality and Human Rights Commissions are another really important area to work in, because these are national institutions. And I think, within Nepal, I'm not sure how your national human rights institution works, but for us in the UK, the Equality and Human Rights Commission has been a very big supporter of ensuring that caste is in equality legislation.
We have an interesting question from Sunaina Arya. That is, what would be your suggestion for internal solidarity among Dalits, given the fact there are internal hierarchy also? And sometimes is asking another question. Also, what is your perspective about, can we resolve, raise these problems without privilege realization, reflection, and commitment to underprivilege and upliftment? So this is combined too.
Okay, you need to tell me the second half of that question again, because your voice went a little bit.
Let's go first one, and then maybe I can come again in for next.
Okay.
So realizing our privilege, can we resolve this issues or not? That's the.
I think, I mean, the internal issues,
Yes.
I think, the internal issues, I think, is something I certainly can't pronounce on. I mean, in the sense of, sitting where I am in London, and obviously International Dalit Solidarity Network. And, our thing is about international solidarity. But I recognize, I know working with Dalit women's organizations that, there is absolutely a hierarchy, and so you have, but you also have, I think with any chain or ladder, there is always someone at the top and someone at the bottom. So how do you make sure that those gaps actually become much more leveled? We're talking about, I mean, ensuring a level playing field, whether you are Dalit or non-Dalit, and whether you are a Dalit man or a Dalit woman. And I know that those hierarchies play out. So, I think it is really important within those groups. That's why Dalit women's groups are so important, because, it's important that they also have a seat around the table, and I have been, with a lot of the work I've done in India, on garments and supply chains, I have been around the table where the textile mill workers they're all women, but the discussion around the table is all taking place amongst men. So that is a constant. I see that all the time. A lot of the, and forgive me, Pradip, but a lot of even the Dalit groups are led by men. They're, it happens. But I think the internal dynamics is not a question I can answer. I just know that I will stand in, side by side with you guys with your mandate. So yes, I mean, I'm not going to make myself out too open to recommend to the internal dynamics anything.
Actually, that's true. Everywhere man capturing, we have now Sunena and other young female leading this movement. That's great, and contributing to the intellectual endeavor. That's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have from Nepal also Sarita, and there is other friends, Ankita, and there's a lot of friends today in our session also from the from civil society. That's great. So maybe we need to talk about our privilege as a man also. That's questionable for me. Maybe a next caste conversation from the female. So that I should think about it. Thank you for highlighting this. We have other questions also. So let me put other questions. So one of the friend, Sanju Singh Bike asks, so this is like, what and how different caste-based discrimination and work descent discrimination, which is recognized by United Nations, why caste-based discrimination is not recognized? Maybe he's asking this way.
Well, I think, you know, I half answered that. So I think this goes back to what a lot of my my colleagues refer to from the Durban conference. So this was the first time, I think it was in 2004, 2000. I mean, I wasn't there at this time. So, you know, I take this as my history lesson as well. And I know that this was the first time that Dalit organizations from specifically across South Asia took the fight of caste-based discrimination to the UN, you know, demanding that, you know, caste-based discrimination was recognized. Now, it wasn't successful at that point, but the important thing was it became embedded into the psyche of some of those UN people. Now, the reason I would say that within the work that we do, caste-based discrimination is not different from discrimination based on work and descent. The discrimination based on work and descent as a term is the one that has been used by the UN because the term caste was never going to be accepted by India in UN declarations. And that is purely and simply one of the reasons why we don't see caste-based discrimination. But with all the work that IDSN does, it does it to address caste-based discrimination.
Yeah, that's a great answer. We have more questions actually coming from friends. This is maybe particular questions from the advocate Prakash Nepali. Caste-based discrimination is practiced and used by all in a global level these days. So can we lobby to produce optional protocol on ISORD, special attention to the caste? So what do you think about this? Maybe ideas in thinking about this.
We are thinking about this. I mean, I think the difficulty here is, you know, as I said to you, we take lots of steps forward. So we have sensitized so many UN special rapporteurs. We have sensitized so many of the CERD members, and then they move, then they go on, and then we have to start all over again because, you know, but the UN process is such a long and laborious one. So, for example, you know, what ideally IDSN would like to see would be a specific convention to address caste-based discrimination, or a convention to address discrimination based on work and descent, if that's the word they want to use. But we had at least 10 years ago, where the UN Human Rights Council actually produced the draft principles and guidelines to address discrimination based on work and descent, which was due to be adopted. And if those principles had been adopted in exactly the same way that the UN had its guiding principles on business and human rights much more recently, then we would have had a really good starting point at the UN, because you've got adopted guidelines, adopted principles, but those principles have never been adopted. We have always had pushback from the government. So that's Indian government, Nepali government. You know, we want those guidelines to be adopted, because without those guidelines, we have no firm base. So like I said, we're always starting from scratch. And without the guidelines, then we can't move towards a convention. And just to put it into context, there is a UN forum on minority issues. The first independent expert on minority issues, Gay McDougall, is a close colleague and also a big friend of our movement, and as was the second special rapporteur on minority issues, Rita Itzhak. And the third rapporteur, Fernand de Veren, is going to continue to raise the Dalit issue during this. But even with a UN forum on minority issues, there still is no convention on minority issues. So even minority issues isn't seen as an absolute guiding principle within the UN. And also, you know, we have difficulty with the word minority within the Dalit context, but this is the only mandate where the Dalit issue fits perfectly. And the three mandate holders have been very clear in their support and included it in their reports. In fact, there was one report from Rita, which was purely based on caste-based discrimination.
Yeah, this is very technical. We are trying to bring Rita also in the future conversation. So we have more questions from the friends. Advocate Bojman Lamgade asks, could you share the best practices to eliminate caste-based discrimination? Which one you feel in a practical life? What are the ways?
I think so we at IDSN have now focused on 3 thematic objectives, and I suspect that some of your colleagues here today, and I can't see their names or anything, will be part of IDSN membership. You know, we have DNF and FEDO and NNDSWO, so, you know, and, you know, others that you know of very well, Pradip. So I think so we have 3 new thematic objectives, and that is like Dalit women and gender justice, an overarching goal on equality and participation. But the third is an area where IDSN hasn't focused to date, but is now focusing on more and more, which is the business and human rights agenda. Now, when you're asking me about practical ways to address caste-based discrimination, this for me is one of the most practical ways, because it brings it to so it takes it out of the UN institutional context and the EU institutional context and brings it back into reality. So when you're talking to international businesses who are all talking about their supply chains and addressing human rights in their supply chains, I will say to them, you will never, ever address your human rights unless you address caste-based discrimination in your supply chains. And there is more and more business moving into Nepal. There is a lot of business, as we know, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and India. So when these businesses are having to report back, I'm saying to them, what about caste-based discrimination? Are you looking at those workers? Doesn't matter where in your supply chain they are, but mostly at the bottom. So this is beginning to raise awareness in international business. Again, the Cisco case in the US, but a lot of the garment workers, the home workers in Nepal, we're talking about how to, so this is raising consciousness. And let's be honest, it's business that talks to government, not us, the CSOs, not us, the INGOs, not us, the small people. It's the ones with the money. And the people with the money are business. So if we can start to address caste in supply chains, that's a really practical way of us to start addressing caste-based discrimination throughout the country.
So, maybe this is my, so many things controlled by business. So we need to hit the business community also. That's
absolutely.
That's your point. How can we do that? How can we do that? So they don't care. Look at the Cisco case and all.
Mm-hmm. So this is I think where IDSN can come in. So recently we also produced, along with the Ethical Trading Initiative, a guidance document to address caste-based discrimination in global supply chains. But this, again, is something that you guys in country need to do, whether it be in Nepal or Bangladesh or Pakistan or India. So we need to have members in Nepal that are trained to address business and human rights. We want to help you do that. So and then, and train you to talk to business. Identify the international businesses because it's the international ones which will make a difference at the moment, not the national ones. So identify those international businesses working in Nepal and see where you can then bring in expertise and IDSN expertise to talk to those businesses, to train them up, to train Dalit organizations to deliver training to those businesses. It's also a way of not only raising awareness, but also working on a very practical level. And as you do, then I hope that these sorts of things kind of have a very positive blossom effect. So, you know, you start with one thing and then that opens up to another, because even if you start with supply chains, that will also open up gender discrimination and then Dalit women gender discrimination, but also the access to health equipment, you know, so it opens up the health, the fact that it's often the poorest workers that are often from the Dalit communities who are being most abused by business. So issues just mushroom. And I think that's something that on a practical level, I would hope that we can take forward.
This is a little bit what we're talking. This is out of our topic, but I just want to ask this. Richaji asked this question. According to you, how might the mindset of dominant groups, particularly caste Hindus, be changed, especially when it involves unlearning purity, pollution-based value systems, and tradition passed on from previous generation?
And this is what I said before. This to me is the hardest thing to address, because without the change of the mindset, which has been set in the mind for 3,000 years, you know, it's going to take a long time for that mindset to change. So one of the things that I was saying before is, and this is something I would push for, whether it be in the UK or the US or Nepal or India or Bangladesh, is for the political and judicial will to ensure that rights are implemented, because there has to be consequences. You know, I mean, the massacre recently of those 5 young men, what have been the consequences to those people who committed that? Nothing so far. You know, and so we have to show that Dalit lives do matter. But the only way that you're going to change that mindset is if people realize that there is a consequence for thinking that Dalit lives don't matter. And the only consequences are legal punishment. So what I've said before is, if laws are implemented, if there is the political and judicial will to implement the laws and the social security benefits and stuff, then what that does is it has to change behavior, because if you break the law, you are then subject to punishment. You are subject to incarceration. It won't change how you think, but it may start to change how you behave if you think there is a consequence to your behavior. And it might not happen in my lifetime, it might not happen in your lifetime, Pradip, or anyone who's listening, but we have to believe it will happen. But we need that political and judicial will, which is why the pressure internationally, and then again from business, will hopefully help change the behavior, even if it doesn't change the mindset.
Let's work for next generation, even though not in our generation. Hope we'll have a just society in our next generation. Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point, actually. So we have a few more questions and then we'll wrap up. But that's the conversation is really, really hot, and this is like kind of discussion we are looking for. Thank you for that. And Advocate Dal Bahadur Biswakarma asks, always these powerholder groups dominate the minority. So how can we make responsibility to these powerholder groups, especially in the scenario of caste and race issues, because you are in UK. So does human rights is still international business for powerholder groups or not? What do you think about this?
I mean, it's the same, in a way, it's the same response as before, because I think sometimes, you know, I just think we need to all go on strike. We need to, you know, literally come out, and it's not a mass protest that becomes a police matter. If you withdraw something that people want, then they start to think, oh, maybe we need to do something about that. And I don't know how that would work. I really don't. I mean, again, I'm not an in-country expert in the same way that you guys all are, but, there has to be some way that, stopping short of violence. And that's the problem, because every time there is any sort of protest against the injustice and the blatant injustice, the blatant inequality, it seems to end in violence. So what do we do about that? How do we change it so it's not, because we can start a peaceful protest, but it will end in violence, whether it be that violence committed by the police or dominant castes. I mean, I don't want to give those dominant castes the excuse to turn around and say, well, look what's happened, because that's what we've seen it in with the CAA protests in India. We need to think of a way that, I mean, and again, how do you change that mindset that can still think today in the 21st century that somebody is less equal to them, that somebody isn't worth the dignity, that stigma. I mean, when I talk to my white British friends here in the UK, when I talk about the purity pollution, they look at me as though I'm mad. It's like, what on earth are you talking? I mean, they know what I do, so they understand it, but they still can't understand it in their brains, because it doesn't matter how little money you have or what job you do, everyone is equal. Everyone has the right to dignity, and everybody has the right to justice. And that's what we don't get. And that's why it's so important that we still keep shouting, whether it's from London or Copenhagen or Kathmandu.
Yeah, very true, whatever. This is my kind of final questions. This question from Samata Pariyar. She writes about, especially on Dalit women issues. So what are some of the new set of questions that are emerging in global Dalit solidarity? So
what are the what?
What are some of the new set of questions that are emerging in global Dalit solidarity?
New set. Well, for us, I think, I mean, as I said to you before, when I'm talking about global solidarity and the work that we do, it's now trying to, I mean, we've talked about ancient slavery, and this is what it is for us and our movement. We know this practice has been going on for 3,000 years, but that's not the language that is currently being used within in the current sphere on the international side. That everyone's talking about modern slavery. So we're talking about how we then show that Dalit rights and the lack of rights and the abuse of rights is still modern slavery as well as ancient slavery. And so it's nuancing the language to show that these questions exist, whether you're talking about Dalit rights now or Dalit rights from 3,000 years ago. And so some of the other new questions that we sorry, was it Sarita who asked this question? Where we're trying to internationalize it in a different way. So recently I sat on a panel talking about Indian matchmaking, which is a Netflix series, which has created a big hoo-ha around the world, not for what it does, but for a lot of the time for what it doesn't say. So the fact is, these are all Indian Americans based throughout the US, and then Indians based in places like Mumbai and Delhi. But they're very wealthy, very fair, very privileged, and nobody mentions the word caste. They talk about community. So this has actually opened up a conversation incredibly, because what this program has exposed is casteism, racism, sexism, colorism. And so these kind of 4 pillars, as it were, is something we're now using to say, this is what's happening within the kind of the Dalit Lives movement. It's racism, it's colorism, it's sexism, it's casteism. And so it's not just always talking about the words that only the UN understands. These are words that the general public understand. So, and the fact is that we've also managed to be doing work with Shadi.com, the dating agency, which apparently had an algorithm mismatched Dalits with any dominant caste people. They also had a filter on their website to tell you what color you were. You know, and I mean, you've all seen them in the marriage adverts in kind of India, Nepal, I'm sure they have the same thing where they ask you, you know, they specify fair, or they want to know what your color is. And I mean, I said to my friends recently, apparently I'm wheatish. And they went, what? You know, what does that mean? What does it even mean? So these are the nuances that we are using to actually say, this is what happens to Dalits every day. This is how you need to understand. So kind of putting it into context of that, alongside the worst of abuses, which is the forced prostitution, the manual scavenging, the lack of any relief when it comes to earthquakes or COVID or any of those things, you know. So from the big to the small, these issues have to be raised at the global level.
Yeah, that's thank you so much. And then I used to work with the young people. Last 15 years I used to work with the young people, and these days young people make this this dating app, and then there is a caste filter option in this young generation dating app, which is right, you know. So it's kind of like, I don't know where we are heading, but it's very true. Let me ask you final questions. Maybe we talk a lot here, and then there's a wonderful conversation you mentioned about the United Nations and IDSN work, and how can we globalize these issues and Dalit solidarity. Maybe do you want to say we have young people here in our platform, and as well as a lot of Dalit CSOs friends here, Dalit-led CSOs friends here. Thank you for that, joining here. And then maybe you have some message. Go ahead, you can take a few minutes for that. And this is the last questions, and then we'll wrap up the conversation.
Well, I mean, I think, Pradip, you're not an old guy, so can I just say, before you start talking about the young people, I think, you know, it's really important. And one of the working with the IDSN board, what we are very much focusing on is the next generation leadership. And I really want to see more of that. I want to see less of the old faces, you know, in front of delegations or presentations, but it's important that generations work together for that, because, you know, the next generation needs the training and the skills and the capacity building. I want them to be the IDSN advocates of the future. In my ideal world, IDSN would no longer exist. You know, IDSN would have no need to exist, and I would be out of a job. That would be fantastic, because our job will be done. But that's not going to happen soon. But what I want to see is that whole generation of young women and young men, or however they identify themselves, because they might be between the two, that they're the ones that speak out, they speak up. They are the ones that will see an end to caste discrimination in their lifetime. And for as long as I'm in this job, I will help to do that and raise the issue and take it to the international level and be the international voice for whatever you ask me to say.
Thank you so much. So creating next generation leader, especially Dalit young girls leaders. So we are also creating a lot of young Dalit female leaders. So we need to do that. Thank you for your work and a tremendous effort, whatever you are making. And then thank you for raising all the Rukum incident, Angira Pashi incident, and then globalize these issues. Thank you for that, and thank you for having with us tonight. So it's a day in London. Hopefully, this is your lunch time.
As you know, I showed you my picture.
So enjoy your lunch. Thank you so much, Minaji. Thank you very much for joining with us today. We have come to the end of today's episode of Caste Conversation. On behalf of Dalit Live Matter Nepal, I want to thank you everyone for your solidarity. This is all about the solidarity day. We need more on that. I'm also thankful to my friends, Roshan, Prakriti, Britika, Sulachana, Vikas, Vijay, and other friends, those who are making this possible. Friends, we'll see you next week with another guest to talk about the caste question in Caste Conversation. This is Pradip Pariyar signing off for today. Namaste, stay safe, stay happy wherever you are. Be aware of COVID-19, Corona.
Yes.
So take care. I have a mask, and then I will start using it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Please
Thank you
stay
very much.
safe, everybody. Namaste. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Stay safe. Take care.